Gilson begins chapter 3 of Methodical Realism by observing that one of the reasons for the low esteem of scholastic philosophy today is that it was scientifically sterile. Despite some late Middle Ages forays into the philosophy of nature, there were no great scientific discoveries at that time, and as a consequence, when 17th century philosophers like Descartes came to examine nature, they found that they had to choose between observational science and scholastic philosophy, and they inevitably rejected the latter. Aristotelian philosophy, Gilson says, has never completely recovered from its opposition to and defeat by modern science. The key question for Gilson is whether scholastic philosophy can develop so as to be compatible with science. And he says, if it were not, I would not myself hesitate to sacrifice it, or, if on the contrary, scholastic philosophy may only have to become more faithful to its own essence than it was in order to harmonize with science and even to help science develop. So it is possible that scholasticism might have a future. For Gilson, that future is going to involve finding a way to be compatible with the true findings of modern science. To understand this opposition more clearly, Gilson then goes back to take a look at Descartes and his mathematical method. This rupture between scholastic philosophy and science actually occurred prior to Descartes' discourse on method. Descartes arrived on the scene too late to kill scholasticism, he says. Instead, he drew up its death certificate, and his Cartesian system supplanted scholasticism in European philosophy. The starting point for Descartes' thought is his idea of a universal mathematics, and the first consequence of this idea is the requirement of going from thought to being, of defining being in terms of thought. This is of the essence of mathematics. In mathematics, definition is always prior to existence. The idea of the ideal circle precedes any particular set of circles that you would draw. But applying the mathematical method to all of philosophy means the substitution of a limited number of clear ideas for the concrete complexity of things. And there may be a line of thought we might pursue, thinking of Descartes as a modern Plato, thinking of possible reasons to endorse or reject that comparison. In Descartes' thought, reality is made up of two ideas and therefore two substances. These are thought and extension. Now, since an idea consists of whatever is in its definition and nothing besides, ideas must be mutually exclusive of each other, and this means that Cartesian substances are mutually exclusive by their very nature. Mind, therefore, is extensionless thought, and matter is thoughtless extension. And the natural consequence of this division, I think, is the despiritualization of the natural world. Material things no longer have any kind of inner life. Not having a formal cause, or any final cause, because there's no formal cause for it to dwell in, we would struggle then to place these natural objects into any kind of single explanatory matrix. So we may find that matter in motion obeys Newton's mathematical laws, but at a metaphysical level, it's baffling. We are eventually moving now towards the skepticism of Hume or the idealism of Berkeley as natural endpoints for this Cartesian line of thinking. Gilson contrasts scholasticism with Cartesianism and notes that in the Middle Ages it was generally accepted that philosophy consists in the transposition of reality into conceptual terms. That is, given real things, we would construct conceptual equivalents that are adequate to them. This means going from being to thought, from reality to ideas. In a word, it's realism. This system requires several concepts to exhaust the essence of a single thing. We might think of a single man, for example, as a human being, as a father, as a brother, etc. Despite its level of abstraction, this scholastic system is not in danger of taking its abstractions for reality itself. The scholastic holds that concepts should conform to the real object. Descartes, much later, will say that concepts are the reality itself, while the scholastic holds that every substance is in itself unknown as something other than, more than, and beyond the sum of its concepts. For Descartes, every substance, insofar as it is knowable, is absolutely reducible to the content of its concept. This is his rationalist method at work. So, Cartesianism leaves us with a number of important problems. and I find one of the narratives of my modern philosophy course reflected by Gilson on page 63, where he writes, Cartesian mathematicism raised difficulties which the whole of the 17th and 18th centuries tried to resolve, and which the 19th century finally despaired of resolving, at the same time despairing of philosophy itself. Now, the Cartesian world of extension in thought leads either to a philosophy of pure spiritualism, as in Spinoza, or a science of pure mechanism, as in Comte's positivism. This result may satisfy the scientist who's content to know the world in this way, but not the philosopher. This amounts to philosophy functioning using an alien method, the method of a different science, and you should recognize this is a constant theme in all of Gilson's books, most especially the Unity of Philosophical Experience. Specific problems that Descartes leaves us with, of course, include the communication of substances. How can mind and matter affect each other if they are distinct in nature? And the problem of causality. How can one material thing affect another material thing if we don't have the mediation of these formal causes of natures in which causal powers can dwell? Lacking any kind of inner life, it's difficult to find any sort of connection between one physical thing or one physical event and another. I won't spend time going over some of the important passages at the end of this chapter. Gilson does spend some time talking about social contract theory as a type of political Cartesianism and about some of Aristotle's specific scientific errors. I will note at the end of the chapter, Gilson says that to move forward, a revived philosophy, a scholastic philosophy, must allow each area its appropriate method. In doing this, it will be able to avoid both Aristotle's error and Descartes' error. So our first duty today, Gilson writes, is to be more faithful to the demands of realism than the Middle Ages were, and to give each order of reality its due. On page 78, Gilson links the persistence of philosophy to Christian theology. It is a relationship with God as the one who is, and this points, he says, to metaphysics as the highest and final science of natural knowledge.